happy to be here because I love libraries. When I first came to school in the kindergarten 56 years ago, our teacher took us on a tour of our school. And I went to a huge school 2 blocks long, 3 stories high. And we came into one room, biggest library I ever saw in any school. It was a public library like this one, a branch library right in our school. So all my mom had to do was sign this paper. They gave me a library card and said I could take books home free. Come back and get some more. Man, I took picture books home in the kindergarten. But you get in the 1st and 2nd grade and learn how to read, then you can get books about dogs, horses, ships, adventures. By the time I was in the 5th grade, I liked books so much, I decided I would write one. And I went home and did, 5 chapters long. They didn't have any young authors contest in those days. I was afraid they'd laugh at a boy trying to write a book, so I hid it in the garage. When I became a teacher, I told every 6th grade class every year, hey kids, someday your teacher's going to write a book, watch and see. They never believed me because I never did. Never had time. Till I found out about Nyanuki and what she did. When I found out about that 11-year-old girl, Indian girl, I said, I'm going to write a book about her and never stop until I get it done because she is so amazing. Lewis and Clark told me about her. They were the first men from St. Louis, Missouri, ever to go all the way across our country. And they came all the way through the state of Montana when it was a wilderness. And old Lewis and Clark got out here. The mountains were in their way of their canoes. They could not get across those mountains with canoes. They needed horses badly. So old Captain Lewis, he goes out, 3 men, and he wanders all through the Beaverhead Mountains of Montana when it was a wilderness, looking for Indian people who had horses. So he could bring them back to the river and trade for horses. And he found Shoshone Indian people who had 400 beautiful horses. And he said to them, come back to the river. We have beads, mirrors, knives, ribbons, flags, uniforms. We'll give you Indian people a lot of wonderful things you never had in your life. Just let us use some of your horses to go over these mountains. So the Indian people went back there. They saw all the canoes and all the men. And they saw one girl with Lewis and Clark, 15-year-old Sacagawea. Sacagawea saw Captain Lewis coming with those people, with everyone else from the canoes. She started walking to see who these Indian people were, and when she came close enough to see, she started to run. She ran toward them. She knew who they were. And out of the crowd came a 15-year-old girl running toward her. And Lewis and Clark said, those 2 girls met, threw their arms around each other, and jumped up and down, danced around and around, laughing and crying. And Sacagawea was saying to this girl over and over, I thought you were dead. I thought you were dead. And Lewis and Clark just stood there, wondering what was happening. And finally he said to Sacagawea, who is this girl, and how do you know a girl way out here in this wilderness? She said, this is my best friend. 4 summers ago, when we were 11-year-old girls, Sacagawea said, enemy warriors came with rifles and shot their men, stole their horses, captured both of those girls and took them 1,000 miles away, clear to the place we now call North Dakota, to sell them as slaves. Sacagawea was sold. But she said, this is my friend who escaped and came home 1,000 miles by herself. Through enemy warriors, bad weather, starvation, one girl comes home. That's when I decided I had to write a book about this amazing Indian girl so all of you would know her. And when I did, I couldn't believe what happened. The kids in Wyoming named this their favorite book in the whole state. Some girls in Bozeman, Montana, they didn't like it outside of their town. The highest mountain was Sacagawea Peak. They said, where is Nyanuki's mountain? Those girls wrote the government, filled out papers, had a campaign. Now outside of Bozeman, the mountain right next to Sacagawea Peak is Nyanuki Peak. And then a man in Denmark read this book, and he said, we want this book in Denmark. So it's been translated into Danish. And now it's translated into Eskimo, and Spanish, and Dutch, and soon Japanese. And Hollywood wants to make a movie out of this book. All those things happened just because I wrote a book about an amazing Indian girl. And I found other amazing Indian children. Sound to Token, the Nez Perce boy, he had a terrible thing happen to him here in Montana. More than one thing was terrible. Chief Joseph in the Nez Perce, wait till you read what happened to that boy. His sunburst Appaloosa horse, his little coyote, Om Costo and his twin sister and his pet raven Wisebird, they're from Montana too. They lived here before there were any horses anywhere around here. What an adventure they had. The raven's so smart, he saved that boy's life in an amazing way. Kunu, he's not from here, but he was dumped out of America with his people into South Dakota. Dumped out, kicked out of America. Did nothing wrong. And that little Winnebago boy and his grandfather is trying to get back to their homeland so grandfather can die there. And they're doing it in a dugout cottonwood tree down the Missouri River. If they are seen, they'll be shot. I came through Missoula many times the last year and a half to go up to the Flathead Lake country and the Kootenai River country to write this book. Pathki Nana, the Kootenai girl. Boys and girls, Pathki Nana was a very sad Indian girl. She didn't think she could do anything right. Seemed like everything she tried was wrong. She had an older sister she thought was better than she was. And boys and girls, they called her the sad one because she went around a lot of times with her head down. One day her sister Red Willow made a beautiful meal for the whole supper, and the mother said how wonderful it was. But when Pathki Nana tried to make lunch, just to boil some fish in a hide bag, she spilled it all on the ground in the dirt. When her mother and sister came and saw her picking up the fish that were ruined, her mother said, Pathki, just go get some firewood. That's something you can do. We'll clean up your mess. Pathki felt sad again, and she started walking out of the village like this. She got her firewood, and on the way back, she saw her grandmother sitting on a log. And her grandmother told her to take the firewood to the lodge and then come back and talk to her. She had something to say to her. And when Pathki sat next to her grandmother on that log, she was kind of scared what her grandmother would say. And that grandmother told Pathki how she was born. She said, Pathki, when you were born, your mother loved you so much. But your mother was dying as she held you in her arms because she was bleeding badly and we could not stop the bleeding. And your mother held you so close for a whole day and a whole night. She loved you just for one day and one night. And before she died, Pathki, your mother said, take my little baby and love her and take care of her. And when she's old enough, you tell her how much her mother loved her. And her mother died with her in her arms, and the grandmother had to take Pathki away from her dead mother and give her to her mother's sister, who was Pathki's aunt, who had a girl, Red Willow, little baby. So Red Willow, or two birds, took care of Red Willow and Pathki and raised them. And when that happens in the Kootenai families, you have a new mother. It just is automatic. You have a new mother. So Pathki grew up never knowing her mother died. And now her grandmother told her. And Pathki looked at her hands and her feet, and she realized she was someone special, loved by a mother who wasn't there anymore. And after that, Pathki felt better about herself somehow. And everything seemed to go really well for a whole year. And one day, Pathki was taking care of her little brothers. That's what girls had to do in those days. Watch the little brothers. And those little boys, 5 and 6 years old, 4 years old, they loved to play a game. They would make a hoop out of a willow branch, a regular wheel, just bend the willow branch and tie it so it was like a wheel, a hoop. And one boy would roll that hoop along the ground. The other boys would stand back here with their little toy bow and arrows and try and shoot an arrow through the rolling hoop, because they knew someday they'd have to be a hunter and maybe shoot at a moving deer. So they shot at the moving target. And every time they shot an arrow through that rolling hoop, all the boys would cheer, and they kept score. And then they kept getting back farther and farther from the hoop to make it harder, to see who was the best shot of all. And Pathki was watching the boys play, and she saw her little brother. He couldn't do very well at all. He didn't get many arrows through the hoop, and she felt badly. And she noticed that he was holding the arrow on the bowstring differently than the other boys. And she knew that's why he wasn't shooting straight. So she was going to help him out. And she took the bow from him and the arrow to show him how to hold it the right way, between your fingers. She should never have done that, because there was a big rule. Girls can never touch bow and arrow or spear. They were only supposed to play with the dolls and the teepees and play house. Never touch a weapon. That's a bad thing. Pathki never even thought about it. She was just going to try and help her brother. And she pulled that arrow back to show him how. It slipped, because she had never held one before. The arrow flew out and hit a boy in the foot and cut his foot. And he started to scream and cry and hold on to his foot. And Pathki got down on her knees to try and help him. And kids ran to the village and told what happened, and the villagers came. The first man to get there was the man that Pathki was afraid of, because his ears had been cut off right here. He was not a Kootenai Indian man. He came from another tribe across the mountains. And when he came to the Kootenai people, they could see his ears were all scarred up. And they wondered what happened to him. And he said his people blamed him for leaving a fight and letting his friends die. But he said, I never left that fight. They blamed me wrong. And when he left that fight, because he was a coward, they cut his ears off to mark him as a coward all his life. So he left his people and came to the Kootenai people, and they're very generous. The Kootenai people help anyone in trouble. And they said, you can live with us. And they called him Cut Ears. He was the first one there to see the boy that was hurt. And he started to talk in his strange language, hollering at Pathki for what she did. And when the Kootenai people came to see, he started speaking in their language, and he said, this is a bad girl. She has done something no girl is supposed to do. She touched a weapon, and now she has hurt this boy. She's bad. Pathki's mother just came and took her by the arm and walked her back to the lodge. Didn't say anything to her. Just says, come, Pathki. They went into the lodge, and the mother gave her a lecture about never touching weapons. And then her stepfather came, and he was madder than ever, saying, no girls touch weapons. And Pathki, see what happened when you did? The spirits made a boy become hurt because you did the wrong thing. Oh, she felt terrible. She could only look down at the ground. She didn't even want anyone to look at her. She was feeling so terrible. Pathki felt so bad that day, she left the village and felt like never coming back. They were camped by a beautiful river, and she went up on a mountain trail and started up through the trees, way up into the mountains. She didn't want anyone to see her. She just felt so terrible. She walked so far, she came up this steep mountain trail out onto a grassy slope, and she looked up above, and there was a huge cliff of rock sticking right up like this. And there was a level spot on the top. Somehow she thought if she was up there and make her feel better, she could see a long ways. So she climbed up that grassy slope, and when she came to the rock, she had to climb up the rock. It was a little bit dangerous. But she got on the top, and when she stood up there, she could see for miles every mountain valley. And when she looked to the north, she saw the most beautiful lake she ever saw, far up in the mountains, right against the mountain. And it looked like a sapphire, blue and beautiful, sparkled. And somehow she knew when she stood there that someday that lake would mean something special to her. She had that strange feeling. But when she looked to the west, she was scared to death. She didn't know how long she walked. She felt so terrible she wasn't even thinking right. And she walked so far that when she looked to the west, she saw the sun was almost going down. And she knew now she was too far from her village to get back before dark. Her mother was really going to be mad now, because she'd never make it back before dark. And she didn't dare go through that dark woods, that forest, because if she met a grizzly bear, people who do that are never seen again. Or if a mountain lion is waiting to pounce on her in the dark. But she wanted to get as close to her village as she could, and down that grassy slope she went, and before it was dark, she was going down the trail. But it got darker and darker. She had to find a safe place to stay for the night. And she came to this huge boulder. It was as big as the side of this room, a huge rock. And underneath, there was a crawl space. The rock was overhanging another rock, and she could crawl under 15 feet underneath the rock. And she knew that was the place she could be safe. She crawled under there. She leveled out a spot where she could lie down for the night. She built up some logs and rocks so no animal could get in there at her. And she crawled in around the outside, and in the pitch dark, she was huddled under this huge rock. She couldn't sleep much. She kept worrying about what was going to happen the next day when her mother would be mad because she was out all night. And during the night, she was dozing off. She woke up because she heard this sound. She knew it was a huge animal. She didn't know what it was. She was smart enough to stay in her shelter, because if that animal was out there, he didn't know who was in there, or if whatever was in there had a knife or a gun. And the animal just stayed there, pacing back and forth. Deep breathing. Pathki was scared. When that deep breathing stopped, she couldn't get to sleep for a long time. She just dozed off. Every little sound, she'd wake up. She couldn't wait for the night to end so she could get home. And before daylight, she was already out of her shelter, careful to see if there was any animal around in the shadows. She sat by her shelter because she didn't dare move away from it. If an animal came, she would crawl back in. And what she didn't know was she was sitting right next to the tracks of the animal that paced back and forth. And there were the paws of a giant grizzly bear that was pacing back and forth outside her shelter. She came 15 feet from that huge animal. And it's a good thing she was smart enough to stay still. And when the daylight came and she could see the roots and the rocks on the trail, she started for home. Her mother didn't see her right away, so Pathki got right to work doing some work, and then her mother saw her and said, "First you do something wrong. You take a bow and arrow and you hurt a boy, and then you go out and you don't come back. Pathki, it's time that you grew up to be a responsible girl like Red Willow. It's time maybe you go out in the mountains and you seek a guardian spirit for your life." Because girls, just like boys, would go out when they got 8, 9, 10 years old, find a place to sit in the mountains for 3 or 4 days with no food, no water, no sleep, and just think about their life. And maybe a vision would come of a guardian spirit that would follow them all their life. That's what they thought would happen. Pathki said, "That's it. That will change my life. I will go seek my guardian spirit." She didn't even tell her mother she was going to do it that very day. And when she started to leave the village, there sat her wonderful grandmother, Quiet One. Quiet One had told her how much she loved her granddaughter. Quiet One, the grandmother, helped Pathki so much. And now she sees her granddaughter leaving, and she knows where she's going without even asking her. She has Pathki come over to the same log, and she says, "Pathki, I know you're a sad girl again. I know you have done things wrong, and I know where you're going. Go seek your guardian spirit, Pathki. You should have told your mother before you left. I will go tell her where you are. You go and come back a grown-up young lady." Well, Pathki left, and she went up that trail, same trail she went up before, because she knew where she would spend her 3 days, up on that ledge of rocks. And she could look at that beautiful lake, see the mountain valleys all around. She'll go right back there. That's what she was going to do. But she's never going to make it to that rock, because something's going to happen on the way up that trail that is unbelievable. The first thing she knew about what was going to happen was she was going up the trail, and all of a sudden she looked down, and there were droppings that a horse left on that trail. They weren't there that morning when she came home. She said, "What is a horse doing on this trail? It just passed there a little while before." The Kootenai people in those days didn't have many horses. They used mostly canoes on the rivers and the lakes. They had a few horses to carry their deer and their elk and their bear meat. So why was a horse up there on this afternoon? She was afraid that maybe somebody was with that horse. She didn't want to be seen. Then she thought maybe that's one of the horses that escaped from our village, because for the last year horses have been disappearing. About one every once in a while would be gone. And everybody thought someone was stealing them. And Pathki thinks, if I can catch this horse and bring it back to the village, my people will be happy. And they'll say, Pathki, you have done a wonderful thing, bringing the horse back. But if somebody's with the horse, she didn't want to be seen. So she left the trail. She went up in the trees and she followed along the hillside through the forest. And she could see the trail down below her. But pretty soon she came to a big wall of tangled bushes, and she had to go down near the trail. And as she was getting closer to that trail, she heard the sound that told her the horse was right nearby. You've all heard this sound if you've been around horses. They blow air through their nose and their mouth. She quick crouched down to see if anyone was by the horse, but she couldn't see. There were two big trees, so she went up to those real carefully and looked between the two big trees. And that's when her heart started pounding, because there, standing next to the horse on the trail, was the man whose ears were cut. It was Cut Ears, and he had the lead rope of the horse. He was just standing there. Pathki said, what is he doing on the trail with this horse? Then all of a sudden she heard the screech of an eagle. And if you've ever heard it, you'll never forget it. And she thought, there's an eagle up there somewhere. But after she heard that screech way up the mountain someplace, she heard Cut Ears make the same screeching sound. He was answering the call of someone coming down the trail. Pathki waited, her heart pounding, and here came this man down the trail, right up to Cut Ears. He handed Cut Ears a package wrapped in a hide about this big. Cut Ears handed him the rope, and Pathki knew what was happening. He was selling that horse to the enemy. She knows now Cut Ears was betraying the people who helped him. And now she knows she has to get back to the village and tell what this evil man has been doing. But she better not be seen. When a squirrel started chattering in the tree above her, she was afraid Cut Ears would come and find her there, because anybody knows that squirrels chatter because they're afraid of something close by. So she thought she'd better get away, so she started to slide back like this, keeping the tree between her and Cut Ears. She was moving very carefully, not watching where she was going too closely. And she almost stepped on a grouse. Grouse is like a little chicken, and that grouse flapped its wings and flew up and made a lot of noise, and now Cut Ears knows somebody's up there. And he comes running up through the forest to see. Pathki took one look at him. He looked into her eyes, and she knew he was coming to end her life, so she couldn't tell he was selling the horse. Pathki turned and ran over the down trees and up the mountainside as fast as she could go. And Cut Ears was right behind her with his knife pulled and ready. He was going to end her life if he ever caught her. And he was big and fast, and he was catching up with her. And when she was jumping over those trees, there was one she couldn't jump because it was about 3 feet high, and she jumped right up on it to jump down. But she didn't jump down. Right below that tree was a little bear cub. She would have jumped right on him. That little bear cub ran for the nearest tree and climbed it. And Pathki dropped down and ran through the open grass to the next trees. And when Cut Ears hit that same log right behind her, Pathki heard an enormous roar. There stood the mother bear, with her paws up like this and her teeth showing, looking Cut Ears right in the face. She thought he was after her cub, and he stood right there. She stood right there and dared him to come off that log. And when she lunged toward him, he turned and ran the other way. And that gave Pathki the chance she needed to get up that hillside as fast as she could. This was her guardian spirit, she knew, taking care of her. But all didn't go well, because Pathki was running so far to get away from him and so fast. She was crossing some logs, and the bark on a log moved, and she slipped off from it. and this leg bone smashed against a tree down below and tore the skin right off her leg. She hit on her side right against the trees, and she heard a cracking sound. She's all hurt, out of breath. Her leg is torn open. She gets up and limps and starts running. She runs only a little ways, and she looks down, sees the blood is coming out of her leg and dripping all down the logs and the grass. And cut ears will come and follow the blood trail and find her. So she stops, takes off her moccasin, ties it around the sore as tight as she can, hangs onto one of the strings so it won't slip down, and she starts running as fast as she can to get away. She ran until she came to a clearing on the hillside, and right outside the clearing she saw a big ledge of rock that went right down like this. She went over to that ledge, she looked over the edge, and she could see another ledge of rock down there, and then up below that one another one. And Pathki went up that ledge of rocks, found a place she could slide down. Then she slid down to the next ledge, and she started running along that bottom ledge, limping badly. Her side was hurting more and more. She found a huge crack in the wall of rock that went way back in, and she crawled in there. She sat down all out of breath, her side hurting. The more she breathed, the more it hurt. She didn't know it, but inside were two broken ribs, cracked right in two. She looked at her leg after she took the moccasin off. It was caked with dirt and bark, and she was hurting badly. She stayed in that crack, waiting to see if he would find her. Just before it was dark, she heard something way up on the top ledge, and a voice called out, "Girl, if you ever come back, you will die, and I'm out here to find you." She heard those terrible words of Cut Ears. He knew it was getting dark and he couldn't find her, so he thought he would scare her away forever. Pathki stayed in that crack until it was dark. Then she moved along that ledge, because down below she saw some trees. They were cottonwoods, and she knew there must be water down there, and maybe a place to hide. And so she slid down the last ledge, her side hurting so badly, her leg was throbbing with pain. And she went into that forest down there and found a pine grove where all the needles were on the ground. And that was her bed for that night. But all night she was aching and her leg pounding with pain. In the morning, looked like it was going to rain. She was so stiff and sore she could hardly move. She found this big log up this high, and she laid some branches down from a tree and covered it with pine boughs, and crawled in when the drizzling rain was soaking her wet. She had pulled up a lot of grass and stuffed it inside. And just like a bird in a nest, she crawled into the grass. And there laid the girl, so sore and so miserable. And boys and girls, she stayed there all day and all night. And the next day she looked at her leg, and it was swelling up, turning bright red around the sore. Infection was setting in. She had a fever, burning up with fever. The infection was going all through her body. And if any of that infection came from her leg up to her heart, it would end her life. There she was, alone and hurt, a fever, and a leg almost twice the size of her other leg. She couldn't even stand up. She was so weak. She was so thirsty, her throat was dry. And she knew right down in the cottonwoods there must be water. And so she dragged herself down along the ground. And there it was, the creek. She went into that creek. It felt good on her leg, that ice-cold water. And she drank some. She felt a little bit better, but still she had the fever. She was burning up. And as she was dragging herself back to the shelter, just going along on the ground, pulling herself along, all of a sudden her hand hit something sharp. She looked at it and picked it up. It was a thorn from a bush right above her. Somehow she knew that thorn would help her leg, because the leg was so swollen and so infected. The pain was so bad she couldn't stand it anymore. She just took that thorn and jabbed it right into the swollen leg. And the pus came out like a fountain. Yellow-green pus spurted out all over her leg and the ground. It was the most awful smelling stuff you ever smelled. Boys and girls, Pathki had done exactly the thing she should have done to get rid of the infection, because I had a leg just like that once that I hurt in the wilderness. I had the same fever, and I had a friend with me who was a doctor, and he said, we have to get you to the hospital and fast. We didn't have the proper tools to do what needed to be done, but by the time I got to the hospital, my leg was swelling and it was all red, and the doctor took a scalpel right in the emergency room and slit the skin, and out it came. Pathki did exactly the thing she should have done. And then she knew she should push herself back to the creek, and into the water she went again. And this time, she let the water go right in the wound, and she kept rubbing it to get all of the infectious pus out of there. And as she was lying there in the water, letting the water clean her wound, she looked up and she saw above her head, right next to the creek, willow bushes. And she knew what her grandmother, Quiet One, told her about willow bushes. Whenever anyone has an ache, if your head is aching or your back or anything, Quiet One said, you chew the willow twigs. And we know now that in the willow twig is the same chemical that's in aspirin. And so Pathki grabbed up some willow twigs, a whole bunch of them, walked back with a piece of wood holding her up, because now she felt so good she could even walk, back into that little nest. She chewed those willow twigs. Some of her pain from her side started to go away a little bit. Her leg looked clean and better, and all of the swelling was leaving. The girl had done just what she should have done, and she knew now her guardian spirit was really taking care of her because she was getting better. Boys and girls, the next day when she heard a sound, she was terrified. She heard some rocks falling up above. She glanced up there, and there he was. He had gone back to the village for a few days to wait and watch to see if she would come back, and when she didn't, he came looking for her. He came to the exact ledge and started his search. And because she was sick, she hadn't moved, and there she was, ready for him to find her. But she went to that creek, and she stayed right in the creek, and she pulled herself along the bank so he couldn't see, up against the bank as close as she could get. Went way out where he couldn't see her, into a huge field full of willow bushes, and she slipped into those willow bushes and headed for the nearest game trail that moose and deer made, and wound her way through the bushes. They were way over her head. He couldn't see her at all. And that day she went on and on and on. The only thing she had to eat were the willow twigs, a few berries, and a couple of roots she could find. She was hungry, but she was smart. She kept drinking water all the time. And if you're ever lost, the most important thing for you to have is water, not food. She went and went and went. And that night, she was going to lie down and go to sleep. She didn't even know where she was. But in the morning, when she woke up, she heard an amazing sound. It was a duck. She looked down through the trees, and there it was, that lake. Like a blue sapphire, she was by the lake. And then the next big surprise happened. There was a tremendous crashing sound coming down through the trees. And she thought it might be cut ears, and she hid. But it wasn't. It was a huge bull elk. Came running right down the mountainside, right into a clearing in front of her. And the foam was coming out of that elk's mouth. His fur was all lathered up with sweat. He'd been running to get away from hunters. And when Pathki saw him move and get closer, she saw 2 arrows sticking in his side. He had been hit by hunters. And now she's happy. She knows she's going to be found by hunters. And all she has to do is tell them about this evil man, and they will take her back to the village. But no hunters came. The elk was so weak, it was almost dead from those arrows. It just kind of stumbled off through the trees. And the hunters didn't come. So Pathki knew what to do, follow that elk. If she could find that elk and he dies, she could have meat and maybe a hide. Just what she needs, food. She followed the elk the drips of blood. And she came to a big place where the elk had stood and did a lot of bleeding. And not far into the trees, there he lay, dead. The 2 arrows still in him. She pulled those arrows out because the arrowheads were sharp, and she needed those to open up the elk's body and to take out some of the meat. And right along, inside the body, right along the backbone is what we call the tenderloin meat. It's the most tenderloin steak you can get. It's delicious. And even when it's just fresh, you can eat it. And she sliced some of that off with one of the sharp arrowheads and ate some meat, and it tasted so good, even raw. But those arrowheads were hard to use because they slipped out of the arrow shafts. She had to use them with her fingers, but they were the sharpest thing she had, and it took her quite a while to cut that hide off. But now her guardian spirit put that bear in Cutier's way, gave her the thorn and the willow twigs, and now the elk. And not only meat, but a beautiful hide. And oh, an elk is a beautiful animal. And this is just one elk hide, and you can see an elk that's big and full grown is a huge animal. And this hide would be her bed and her shelter to keep her from freezing to death. Now, boys and girls, when she scraped it with a rock. Didn't look pretty like this. It looked rough. And she took the fat from the animal and rubbed it on here and in the hide to soften it a little. This one is beautifully tanned. But that elk hide would be her bed and her shelter. The meat she would dry in thin strips, and it would help her stay alive. And at that lake, she camped in a different place every night in case Cutier's come, he wouldn't find her. And if she went down to the lake, she didn't walk in the grass and tramp it down or in the mud and make tracks. She would find a tree to walk on, a fallen tree, or a rock, so she would leave no tracks, because if he saw any of her tracks, he would find her. And one day, when she was at the lake, she looked at the ridge on the other side of the lake and decided to go up there and see what was on the other side of that ridge. And when she was up there, she looked down and saw a beautiful river. We now call it the Kootenai River, right here in Montana. And somehow she knew that river could lead her back home. She was so excited. She was going to start out the next morning. And on her way back to her elk hide in her camp, she was coming down the ridge toward the lake. She saw this animal, a coyote, sneaking along the bank of the lake. The old coyote was headed for an island in the lake where 2 trumpeter swans had a nest and 5 eggs. Pathki saw that trumpeter swan on the way up to the ridge, and she looked down there and saw that mother swan stand up over those eggs and take her head and neck and turn them all over gently in the nest so she could warm her babies on all sides. And the mother swan, who loved those little babies and those eggs, didn't know that this coyote was coming to eat her little babies. And the old coyote went into the water, started for the island. As the coyote was swimming along and the swans didn't know he was coming, suddenly he scared up a duck. And the father swan flew off of that island and came to see what was happening. And the father swan saw this elk. And the game and fish man told me what he saw a swan do. That old swan, 45 pounds, landed on that 20-pound coyote right on its back. Took its beak and grabbed it by the back of the neck and drove his head under the water and held him there. And the mother swan came, and she took her turn holding him under until the coyote was drowned. The father swan stayed there until the coyote floated to the top. The father swan even followed the dead coyote to the bank to make sure he didn't come back to life. And when the old coyote snagged on a dead tree by the bank of the lake, the father swan left. And Pathki knew she had another gift, the coyote hide. And she went over there, dragged that dead coyote out of the water. And you can see how she would clean it. She wouldn't make any cuts in here. Cut only underneath the tail, and take all of the meat and everything out. And then she could sew this end up, and she had a nice bag to put in all the elk meat and everything she needed. The coyote hide. And she took all the thin strips of tendons she could use for fishing line. She didn't waste a bit of it. She took some of the small bones in case she needed fish hooks. Boy, she had another gift from her guardian spirit. That girl knew she was going to make it home now. But when she went down to the river to start her trip home, she met another animal who had a surprise for her. The river otter. Oh, if you've ever seen otters play, they love to play more than kids do. They chase each other, they slide, they dive, they play hide-and-go-seek, they play tag. They love to play. And she watched the otters play right by her camp. But she saw them do something else. Those otters came to a certain place in the river and they dove down underwater. And every time they came up with a trout. Every time. And Pathki said, that's the place where the fish are. She gets out her fishing line, she puts on a hook, she catches a grasshopper, hooks it on the bone, and she's going to lower it right in where those old otter catch all those fish. And she'll catch some because she loves to eat fish. But when she lowered her line in the water, it snagged right away. It wasn't a fish, it was a cod. When she reached down in there to get it loose, she pulled up something. It was the gift of the otter to this girl. She discovered how the otter were catching those fish. The otter knew how the fish got caught underwater. And when Pathki would get back to her village someday, she would tell the secret of the otter to the fishing chiefs. And it would change the way her people fished forever. But boys and girls, on her way back, following that river, before she gets home, Cut Ears is going to stand so close to her, she could practically reach out and touch him. She's not going to see him just once before she gets back. 2, 3, maybe 4 times. And she's going to have to use all of her intelligence to fool him to get back to her people. And when she does, boys and girls, what a story she will have to tell. The story of the bear, the story of the thorn, the story of the willow twig, the story of the elk and the arrows, the story of the majestic love trumpeter swans have for their unborn eggs, the story of the otter. The things that happen to that girl when she comes back and she tells them to her people, they will never have heard a story like this one in their life. And Pathki will be the amazing girl if she can make it back. Now everybody who's got a copy can find out if she does. Now boys and girls, before we quit, I never tell a story without honoring the Indian people I write about. And if I have been in your school, you know I do giveaways everywhere I go. So, we will do a giveaway. We have someone here who is part Kootenai, right? Come on up. We will honor the Kootenai people. We will do a giveaway. When I visited the Nez Perce people, they did giveaways when they were happy. You have Pathki, eh? Do you have all of my other books?
No.
You don't, eh? All right. You don't have Nyanuki? This will be your giveaway. Is that good?
Mm-hmm.
All right. And what name did I write in there?
Karen, C-A-R-Y-N.
C-A-R-Y-N. Now, this is one of those wonderful Kootenai people, like Pathki Nana, which means girl child. This also is a girl child, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's give her a big hand. Thank you. I am happy you came, boys and girls. Let me tell you something. One of the greatest things in the world that I ever do is read. And I was a little boy one time who loved books. If you love books and you love to read, good things will happen to you just like they did to me. Thank you for coming tonight.